Okay, progressively getting more complicated with these questions. Notice what this particular question says. Broker made 7,000 on a recent transaction. Okay, well, that's interesting because we're starting at the end. A broker made 7,000 on a recent transaction after paying the firm a 30% split. The listing fee was 5% and was split evenly between the firms. What was the sale price of the property? Now, this is where people start having problems. And the reason they have problems on this is because you're now working backwards instead of going forward. So here's what I'm thinking in my mind. If I'm trying to find the sale price of the property, that's usually the whole is usually going to be this box right here. So, okay, all right. So I'm going to have to work backwards in this just a little bit. So a broker made $7,000 on a recent transaction after paying the firm a 30% split. Well, if he paid the firm a 30% split, technically his split is 70%. Okay. So in other words, the $7,000 represents 70% of some number. Now, remember on the T-bar, if you have one number above the T-bar and one number below, you're going to simply divide on the T-bar. So 7,000 divided by 70% or 0.7, as I'm typing in my calculator, means 10,700. You're like, well, that's way too little. I mean, that can't be how much the house sold for. No, that's not. What we found here was this is the whole. This is the amount of money that the firm received. $10,000, of which they kept three and they gave 7,000 to the buyer agent in this particular case, or to the broker in this particular case. And so what we really need to do is figure out how that $10,000 ultimately relates to the total of what the house was priced. So let's try one more step here. And here's what we have now. Our commission is $10,000. And the way that that relates to the total amount paid, notice this line here. The listing fee was 5% and was split evenly between the firms. Well, what that tells me is if 5% total was the commission and it was split evenly, that the buyer's firm received 2.5%. The other team did as well. But having said that, all we're looking for is this side. So now we have the commission that was made, the rate, and what we're looking for now is the whole, which in this case is the sale price. So 10,000 divided by 2.5%. I believe that that's going to be, let me make sure, $400,000. $400,000. Okay. Now, let's talk about that for just a moment. All of a sudden, for my students that are not math people, they really struggled with this particular problem. So what I would recommend to you is if for some reason you can't solve it that way, just go to the answers and start working backwards. So in other words, if you had started with one of these and you multiply it by the 2.5% and then applied a 30% split to it or a 70% split to it, as the case may be here, what would happen is you would work your way back to that $7,000. Let me show you. I'm only going to choose the right answer since we know what the right answer is, but I'm going to show you how to back check this. You can do this on every one of them. So here's what we do know. And you were doing fine with this in the previous problems. Property sold for $400,000. And if I were just looking to see how much the firm made, 2.5%, by now that's an easy calculation for you. $10,000. Okay. And then I'm telling you that the broker made $7,000 and he gave 30% split to the firm. So he must be on a 70% split. 10,000 times 70% equals the 7,000 that we started with. There is no other of the numbers A, B, C, or D that would be able to come back to the $7,000 that we started here. So remember on these test questions that you can always try to work them backward and forward if you need to, but we're looking for the right answer. We don't really care what strategy you use to get there.